I have been desperately waiting for a good 4X strategy game, and thank goodness, Endless Legend 2 is here. Fans have been waiting for over a decade since the first Endless Legend released, and this, the early access for Endless 2, feels like a solid, iterative, and faithful sequel to the initial game. It's also all of those things toward the developer, Amplitude Studios' broader catalogue of games. Here's looking at you, humankind. Endless Legend 2 is a turn-based strategy game, a fantasy game, and a great-looking one at that. It leverages on its unique Tidefall and Monsoon seasons to slowly expand the game world in a satisfying way that encourages exploration of freshly revealed map territories, of new resources, wonders, and independent factions to bribe or assimilate. It comes in phases. Normal sunny times, then you move through a monsoon season, a dark, terrifying time where battle yields are increased, and finally, tidefall occurs as the waves wash away. Jumping into a game of Endless Legend, you'll be met with 5 distinct factions, each with its own broad theme shown down the bottom here, like the Last Lords with their economic theme. The factions are purposefully asymmetrical. They're not meant to be the same, and they behave in very different ways, like the necrophage warmongers here, who generate corpses from enemies that they destroy, and they can only build one core city. Game setup options are currently a little bit limited, particularly on game speed in this build, as it's coming soon. And of course, as there are only 5 factions, if you're playing on a larger map size, like Huge, which is recommended for 8 players, you will have to have duplicates in your game. Endless Legend 2 is a game buried with rich lore. Really, the whole thing. Every faction has a wonderful story to go along with it, and the entire game is fueled by quests. Starting a game will feel very familiar to 4X players, particularly, again, if you've played some Amplitude games. If I turn on the hexagonal grid and tile yield, you'll get a feel for what's going on here. The objective to explore and find a place to settle a city. Claiming territories and building cities is a big focus here, of course, just like any 4X strategy game. This time around it works a little bit differently in Endless Legend 2, maybe compared to some other games that you're used to. The first layer is called a foundation, and you'll generally use influence in this game to expand your foundations out, claiming the yield of the tile. Once a foundation is in place, a district can be built depending on which ones you've unlocked. These have adjacency bonuses. They tend to be fairly straightforward to understand and use. There are also a couple of issues around the UI here. I'd like, for example, the districts to show up all of the time, rather than just when I click on a tile. Small frustrations that I'm sure can be ironed out throughout this game's early access period. More on those a little later in the video, though. Patrolling units and armies can claim territories by founding camps within them, like this one here, and camps can then be attached to nearby cities, should they have the capacity and should you have the yield to do so. This is the fundamental city building. Again, it'll be very familiar to you if you've played some Amplitude games before. It works very well, and generally speaking, is pretty easy to understand. Cities can also construct a variety of improvements to improve the core or various districts, as well as construct units, and you can manually manage things like population types to change the yield of a city, as well as do some potential landscaping to restore barren tiles. Combat takes place on the map in a round-by-round format within a sort of drawn-out battleground. All of the great quality of life features I would want to be here are generally here, like instant resolve, where I can see the sort of outcome here. In this case, it's looking pretty good for me. Or I can choose to fight manually, using each of my unit, their skills, both passive and active. Of course, this particularly applies to heroes, to really get a fine feel for the combat engagement in this game. This includes things like elevated ground and special abilities for all of the many different types of units. Should the fights ever feel either A, overwhelming, or B, a little bit too time-consuming, you can also choose to auto-resolve the fight while you're controlling it, or swap in between auto and manual to try and get the best out of the AI and your own abilities. You can also change the animation speed from normal to fast. Again, nice quality of life features here that make combat, generally speaking, very enjoyable in Endless Legend 2. And like any good 4X fantasy strategy game, shout out to Age of Wonders 4, here we have heroes. And our heroes earn hero points. These skill points can be assigned, again, to passive skills or to active skills. To give your hero extra abilities in the fight, on the map, or otherwise, you can also assign overall hero attributes. These will boost the effect or the impact of various skills. It's a great system. It's fairly intuitive to use, and there are lots of potentially very powerful combos here. Equipment from battles, discoveries, or quests can also be earned, sold, or more importantly, equipped here. Things like weapons, armory, and extra skills can be assigned to your different heroes. The heroes also help to build into the lore of the game, often coming with their own biography, story, relationships even with one another, friendship, companions, and they'll develop nemesis or enemies with those heroes they come into contact with. Thankfully, these units do revive after a few turns, should they perish in the fight. They also come with their own traits. Overall, it's a really satisfying system to use. I love the heroes in this game, their design is fantastic, and everything around them is, again, generally just pretty fun. And everything that I've talked about so far have kind of faction-specific elements. Here I'm using a Sacred Flame Observatory, for example, to strike down an enemy within my territory. A wonderful little feature for a scientific religious faction, absolutely. And of course the same can be said for the faction-specific quests that you can check at any time, alongside other key, often at times a little overpowered features like the Council, for example, where your heroes or other key sort of characters that you've met along the way can be assigned for often empire-wide benefits. Some of these particularly powerful or, again, unique to the faction that you're playing. And this is, of course, not to overlook the very powerful abilities, traits, whatever you want to call them, that these factions have. Like one of my personal favorites, the glassification of a region playing as the Tahooks. It can create some rifts, but it is absolutely worth it for some glorious scientific glass terrain. As you reach the end of a successful game, you'll want to plan for victory, something that has consistently surprised me and confused me. Sometimes I unexpectedly win, and I just cannot figure out how. But should the victories be working properly and appropriately, this is generally how it works. On the right-hand side of the victory screen, you can see you can win by a score victory. Number of turns, score based on your empire's overall development from actually quite a lot of different categories. Or you could go for maximum conquest. Empires are eliminated in this game when they have been without a city, any city, for 10 turns. By far and away the easiest path to victory will be on the left-hand side of the screen, the awakening victories, which essentially encompass each of the core goals of the game, from wealth to science, production, food, expansion, really the whole lot. And it's all condensed into this screen, where you choose one of 3 paths. Thankfully, you can change it at any time using an in-game quest story event. It's very easy to change. In my limited playing experience so far in this, again, early access build, I find that these are not very well balanced. And in fact, one of the reasons why victory can be so surprising is because the middle pathway in particular is very easy to earn. Take a look at this. In order to win the Impress victory, you need to reach 2 conditions. It's the same for the Master, whereas the Worship requires 3. The Worship requires you to have 80 populations of one different type, i.e. 50 in this case I have of the Last Lords. I'd need to get that up to 80 Last Lords. Then I'd need to build 15 relatively expensive monuments, that's my production, and finally get to the end of the technology tree and research all of the final techs. So this requires food, production, and science. On the right-hand side, mastery, I liken to an expansion victory. Here we need to control a certain number of territories, a certain portion of the map, as well as go out, fight, and clear fortresses, which is a great thing to do and an awesome part of the game. 20 can be a little difficult, but if you're aggressive enough and expansive enough, it's totally doable. And your final path to victory in the middle is Impress. Here, you need to have resources. The core resources, in this case, 20 of each type. And you also need to sway the public opinion of 7 of your enemies or allies. These can be, crucially here, both your AI opponents as well as the independent factions. You can see the Hydracorns, the Unseeing Seers, etc. This is very easy to gamify. The AI is generally very willing to accept extra deals from you, and you can make your own declarations, like open borders, as well as propositions that they'll send to you, sometimes a little bit too much. Nonetheless, this can really help to sway public opinion, as well as your overall actions. Just kind of be a decent neighbor, have a little bit of money, and you'll be able to win them over. Some technologies like cultural education here in Era 5 also make it generally pretty easy to improve public opinion. And combine that with the relatively low cost of assimilating factions who will always love you once you've assimilated them, and it's fairly easy to achieve the diplomatic goal. On the resources front, once you've built one trading post, you can just pop up here to the right-hand side of your screen and buy the amount that you need. This is honestly pretty easy to do. In this case, this particular clip, I was playing as the Dust Lords, so I was making really a lot of money, but you don't need to be playing as them to achieve this. I've done it with most other factions. So on balance, it would be fair to say that I'm critical on the fairness of the victory conditions. I do like the way they're structured though. And this kind of brings me to the next section of my video, and really the critical part. Here again, I'd like to stress that this is an early access build. The first one, releasing end of September 2025. And I'd add, I'm just a moron on the internet, nothing special here. But my first and most significant major criticism, beyond those victory ones anyway, is the lack of factions currently available. Now, if you play small or tiny games, and or only really intend on playing a limited number of games, then this criticism won't apply. But if you want to play a game with more than 4 unique opponents, you're going to run into duplicates. Same faction, same units, generally same traits and behavior, same deal. The color or symbol will be different, but everything else, naturally, including their broad playstyle, given how asynchronous and unique the civilizations, the factions are in this game, all of that stuff will be the same. And that's just not that great. It can, however, be very fun to set up a meme game against 5 duplicate Warmonger bug opponents or something similar, but it's never going to be as good or as replayable, in my view, as having a more fulsome roster of factions. Elements like the independent factions that you choose to assimilate will help to create some differentiation. Of course, spawn point and that kind of thing will also largely determine how the game plays out, but ultimately, there's going to be a lot of repetition if you want to play on large or huge maps in particular. The fact that the custom faction creator is missing in this build is likely the nail in the coffin here, right? No way to create custom factions or share them with one another, modding, etc. The team have acknowledged that they will be adding more to the game, of course, and I'd imagine this will include additional factions throughout its early access. At the time of recording, I'm yet to see a roadmap though, so it's difficult to nail down specifics beyond things that have been alluded to in developer diaries. In many ways, it makes this more of a watch this space, and warning, it is limited because it is in early access. And thankfully, Endless Legend 2 is a title that hasn't shied away from very clearly being an early access game. It hasn't tried to trick people into thinking that it is full and complete, and that, at the very least, is surely a little bit of a breath of fresh air. Some questions do still remain though. How many factions will be added in early access and beyond version 1.0? And how many, if any, will be part of future paid expansions after the early access period? In an ambitiously Amplitude game, one of asymmetrical factions, balance is also another concern, let's say. I would argue it's never really going to be achieved, and it doesn't feel present here to me in a lot of places. I'm not sure it really matters though. I kinda like the idea of all-powerful, unique factions not shying away from what makes them special, and I'm willing to accept a balanced trade-off for that. I also expect a lot of balance work and tweaking to happen throughout early access and beyond. And this will go right down into the detail of things like weapon or gear stats, and hopefully stretch out to the bigger things like blatantly overpowered counselors or victory conditions in need of some tweaking. So, with a gentle reminder to subscribe if you like this kind of content, it's time for my early conclusions on this very early access game. I think that Endless Legion 2 is a great 4X fantasy turn-based strategy. And while I can't yet speak to other elements of it, like its future modding or multiplayer potential, I can say that I've really enjoyed my time in Endless Legion 2 so far. It's absolutely early access, right? I mean, it's missing things like game speed and the custom faction creator. And those things will make a big difference to the overall game, its replayability, you get the idea. I would also expect things like game balance, the clunky at times text, and city UI to change throughout the early access period as challenges come to light and as feedback is worked on. The game is very well set up to take on said feedback, by the way, right from the game's menus, and the developers do seem passionately engaged. And thankfully, the current build actually already ticks a lot of the boxes for me. Beautiful map, check. Great soundtrack, check. Flavorful units, you betcha. And a unique approach to dividing the game into very natural feeling eras, ages, sections, whatever you want to call them, using the Tidefall and Monsoon mechanics, that dynamic map. I'm looking forward to following Endless Legion 2's early access development, and I think, frankly, it's going to make a great addition. In fact, it already makes a great addition to the kind of 4X, more broadly, strategy games that I like to play. Do let me know your thoughts down below on this wonderful new early access strategy game, and thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.